The world was supposed to end. Not once, not twice, but many, many times. People have always looked at the sky, at their books, at their calendars, and they have seen the end coming. Think about it. We've lived through so many doomsdays that never arrived. It's a strange part of being human, this constant looking for a finish line that just keeps moving. Why do we keep doing it? What makes us so sure time and again that this time is the last time? Imagine the fear, the panic, the strange relief when the sun just rises again, just like always. From ancient scrolls telling of fiery cosmic resets to philosophers predicting the world's fiery end, and from simple calendar cycles that get misunderstood to prophets seeing the ultimate destruction in their visions, humanity has a long history of planning for an end that doesn't come. This isn't just about silly beliefs. It's about how we try to make sense of life, death, and what might come next. It's about power, faith, and sometimes a little bit of madness. We will look at some of these moments, these grand predictions that fell flat. We will see the people who believed them, the dates they set, and the quiet morning after when everything was just still here. Number 15. Did the Maya really predict the end of the world in 2012? A lot of people remember 2012. It was everywhere. Movies, books, news stories. The idea was that the ancient Maya calendar, specifically the long count, was supposed to end on December 21st, 2012. And when it ended, boom, the world would too. There were fears of cosmic alignments, planetary collisions, earthquakes, you name it. People really believed it. They built bunkers. They stockpiled food. Some even moved to places they thought would be safe, like the small French village of Bouguereau, which was swamped by doomsday tourists. But here's the thing. The Maya didn't actually predict the world ending. Not at all. Their calendar didn't stop. It just finished a cycle and started a new one. Think of it like a car's odometer hitting 99,999 miles and then rolling over to zero. The car doesn't explode, it just keeps going. The long count calendar marked time in cycles called Baktuns. The 13th Baktun was set to end. In Maya cosmology, the end of a Baktun wasn't about destruction. It was about renewal, a new beginning. Archaeologists and epigraphers, people who study ancient writings, have been saying this for years. Dr. David Stewart, a professor of Mesoamerican art and writing at the University of Texas at Austin, published articles explaining this. He pointed out that Maya inscriptions talk about dates far beyond 2012. One tablet found at the archaeological site of Palenque even records dates hundreds of thousands of years into the future. Another, the Tortuguero Monument 6, mentions the 2012 date but frames it as a celebration, a new beginning, not an apocalypse. The misunderstanding largely came from Western interpretations, mixed with New Age beliefs and some older prophecies about world ages. It was a classic case of taking a complex ancient system and simplifying it into something it wasn't. The Maya themselves, or their modern descendants, never saw 2012 as an end. It was just another day, another cycle. In fact, on December 21st, 2012, many Maya communities held ceremonies to mark the new cycle, celebrating the continuity of time, not its end. The global panic was a modern invention, a projection of our own anxieties onto an ancient culture. We saw how powerful these ideas can be, even when they're completely wrong. People lost money, they lost peace of mind, all because of a mistranslated calendar and a good story. What if other ancient texts are also misunderstood in similar ways? How much of our modern interpretation of history is just us projecting our own fears? And what does it say about us that we so readily embrace ideas of cosmic destruction even against evidence? Number 14, what was Ragnarök and why didn't it bring the world's end? Ragnarök is a huge deal in Norse mythology. It's not just an end, it's the end. A specific fated sequence of events that leads to the death of gods, giants, monsters, and almost all of humanity. The world is plunged into darkness, swallowed by the sea, and then, eventually, a new world rises. It's a cyclical end, but it's a massive, violent one. The name itself means fate of the gods. The stories about Ragnarök come mainly from two Old Norse texts, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, written down in Iceland in the 13th century. These works compile much older oral traditions. Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic historian, poet, and chieftain, wrote the Prose Edda, which gives us a detailed account. He describes a long, harsh winter called Fimbulwinter, where snow falls from all directions for 3 years, with no summer in between. Then come the wars, the moral decay, the sun and moon being devoured by wolves, the stars vanishing. The great Midgard serpent rises from the ocean, causing massive floods. The giants, led by Loki, sail to battle. The fire giant Surtur burns the world with his flaming sword. Odin, Thor, Freyr, and most of the other gods die fighting. This is a profound end of the world scenario, but it's a mythical one. It's not a prediction with a specific date that didn't happen in a literal sense. It's part of a belief system, a cosmic drama. The Norse people didn't believe Ragnarok would happen on a Tuesday next week. They understood it as an inevitable, ultimate event in their cosmology, a part of the grand cycle of creation and destruction. It explained the potential for chaos and the eventual triumph of order, even after such devastation. Some scholars, like Dr. Caroline Larrington, a professor of medieval English literature at the University of Oxford, have explored Ragnarok not just as an ending, but as a reflection of the harsh realities of the Viking Age of the violence. The short life expectancies, the constant struggle against nature. It was a way to make sense of suffering and to find meaning in a world that could be cruel. The idea that a few gods and 2 humans would survive and build a new world also offered a glimpse of hope beyond the destruction. So Ragnarok didn't fail to happen in the same way a calendar prediction failed. It's a narrative truth rather than a historical one. It speaks to deeper anxieties and hopes. It's a story that helped people cope with their world, not a timetable for its demise. But what if the cycle is real and we're just in the quiet time before the next Fimbulwinter? How do ancient myths like Ragnarok still shape our ideas about the end of the world even today? And if our stories about the end reflect our present, what do our current apocalypse stories say about us? Number 13, was the Zoroastrian Frashokareti supposed to happen by now? Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest monotheistic religions, originating in ancient Persia, what is now Iran. It dates back to the 6th century BCE, possibly even earlier. Central to its beliefs is the concept of Frashokareti, which means making wonderful or making excellent. This isn't just an end day, it's a final cosmic renovation, a complete purification and restoration of the world to its original, perfect state. It's an eschatological event, meaning it's about the ultimate destiny of humanity and the universe. According to Zoroastrian texts like the Bundahish, written in the 9th century CE but based on much older traditions, the history of the world is divided into 4 periods of 3,000 years each, totaling 12,000 years. The final 3,000 years are marked by the coming of 3 saviors called Saoshants, born from the seed of the prophet Zarathustra. The last Xiaoshian Asvat Ereda will lead humanity in a final battle against evil. This will culminate in a great assembly where everyone, living and dead, will be judged. During Frashokareti, all evil and imperfection will be destroyed. The physical world will be renewed, becoming immortal. The dead will be resurrected, and all creation will achieve a state of perfect harmony with Ahura Mazda, the Wise Lord. There is a river of molten metal that purifies everyone, painful for the wicked, but like warm milk for the righteous. It's a cosmic cleaning, not a simple destruction. While Zoroastrianism has these time cycles, it doesn't set a hard and fast date for Frashokareti that has explicitly passed. The 12,000-year cycle is quite vast. However, interpretations throughout history have sometimes seen the end of one of these 3,000-year periods as potentially bringing about these events. Some scholars like Dr. Mary Boyce, a leading expert on Zoroastrianism, have discussed how different periods saw varying emphasis on the immediacy of Frashokareti. People in ancient times often saw themselves as living in the final age, hoping for the imminent arrival of the Saoshants. This is a common human tendency to feel like the present moment is uniquely significant. But the predictions within Zoroastrianism are more about a cosmic process than a specific datable event. It's a moral and spiritual transformation of the world, a slow unfolding towards ultimate goodness. It's not a sudden boom and bust. The teachings focus more on individual responsibility in the fight against evil Druj and promoting good Asha in the present to help bring about Frashokareti. So, Frashokareti hasn't happened yet, but it wasn't a failed prediction in the sense of a missed calendar date. It remains a core hope and a guiding principle for Zoroastrians. It's an ongoing aspiration for the world's ultimate good, rather than a deadline that passed. Does the idea of a cyclical gradual renewal offer a more comforting vision than a sudden destructive end? How do ancient religious prophecies of cosmic transformation compare to scientific predictions of the universe's eventual heat death? And if our actions now contribute to a future making wonderful, does that change how we live? Number 12. Did ancient Greek Stoics believe the world burned down before? Yes, they did, The Stoics, a school of philosophy that started in ancient Greece around the 3rd century BCE, had a very specific idea about the end of the world. It was called ekpyrosis. This means conflagration or burning up. But it wasn't a one-time event. For the Stoics, the universe was cyclical. It would periodically be consumed by fire, then reborn again, only to repeat the cycle. This idea was central to their physics and cosmology. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, taught this, and later Stoic thinkers like Chrysippus, Cleanthes, and even the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius discussed it. Seneca, another famous Stoic philosopher, wrote about the ekpyrosis in his Natural Questions, describing how the world would dissolve into fire and then reform. The Stoics believed that the universe was made of a primary substance, a divine fire, or pneuma, which was rational and ordered. This pneuma expanded and contracted. When it expanded, it formed the cosmos as we know it. But eventually it would contract back into itself, a process of reabsorption into the fiery original state. This reabsorption was the ekpyrosis. All matter, all souls, everything would be consumed by this cosmic fire. After the destruction, the universe would then be recreated exactly as it was before. This meant that every event, every person, every moment would repeat infinitely in precisely the same way. This is known as eternal recurrence. It's a pretty mind-bending idea. So for the Stoics, the world was constantly ending and beginning again. It wasn't a prediction that failed, but a fundamental tenet of how they understood the universe. They didn't put a date on it, though. It was an inevitable, natural process, like breathing for the cosmos. The purpose of understanding ekpyrosis was not to fear it, but to accept it as part of the rational order of the universe. It reinforced their core ethical teaching: live according to nature, accept what you cannot change, and focus on what you can control and your own virtue and reactions. Scholars like Dr. Brad Inwood, a professor of classics at Yale University, have studied the Stoic concept of ekpyrosis in depth, showing how it connected to their views on fate, determinism, and the nature of God, which they saw as immanent in the universe rather than transcendent. It was a scientific theory for them, based on their understanding of physics, not just a mythical story. This cyclical view of cosmic destruction and rebirth is found in other ancient traditions too, but the Stoics gave it a highly rational and philosophical framework. It was a rigorous system, not a casual belief. If the universe repeats itself perfectly, does our free will even matter? What does it mean to live a good life if everything is fated to happen again and again? And could this ancient philosophical idea of cosmic cycles ever align with modern scientific theories about the universe's ultimate fate? Number 11. When did the Hindu Kali Yuga end, and why are we still here? In Hindu cosmology, time isn't linear, it's vast and cyclical. The universe goes through immense periods called yugas, which are part of an even larger cycle called a Mahayuga, and then even larger cycles. There are 4 yugas: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Each yuga sees a decline in dharma righteousness, morality, and human lifespan. So we are currently believed to be in the Kali Yuga, the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the darkest and shortest of the 4 yugas. The Kali Yuga is said to last for 432,000 human years. Its beginning is often placed around 3102 BCE, coinciding with the departure of Krishna from Earth. According to texts like the Mahabharata and the Puranas, the Kali Yuga is characterized by war, famine, greed, suffering, and a breakdown of social order. People become smaller, weaker, and live shorter lives. Eventually, at the very end, there will be a cosmic dissolution, a pralaya, before a new Satya Yuga begins. So, the Kali Yuga is still ongoing, it hasn't ended, and it has a long, long way to go, tens of thousands of years by traditional reckoning. The end of the Kali Yuga isn't a single, sudden event in the immediate future, but a far-off point in a grand cosmic timeline. The concept of an end in this context is about the dissolution of the current age making way for the next. It's a slow decay over millennia, not a sudden apocalyptic date. However, throughout history, especially during times of great social unrest or natural disaster, people have sometimes believed that the final moments of the Kali Yuga were upon them. There have been various figures and movements in India that interpreted prophecies about the end of the age as being imminent, because I feel like I have the solution rather than a specific failed date for the world's destruction. The texts describe a gradual worsening of conditions, not a sudden, clean break. All scholars of Hindu traditions, such as Dr. Wendy Doniger, a professor of the history of religions at the University of Chicago, have extensively analyzed the Yuga cycles, highlighting their metaphorical and philosophical significance. They are not just chronological markers, but moral and spiritual indicators of human decline and renewal. The cyclical nature means there's always hope for a new beginning, even after the darkest age. The concept of the Kalki Avatar, the 10th and final incarnation of Vishnu, who will appear at the end of the Kali Yuga to destroy evil and usher in the next Satya Yuga, is a key part of this future vision. So, the Kali Yuga has not ended, and the world is still here because the end is still millennia away according to the traditional Hindu calendar. It's an ongoing process, a vast unfolding of cosmic time, not a specific doomsday clock that stopped ticking. Does believing we are in a dark age influence how we live our lives and how we view the future? What if our current societal challenges are actually part of a larger cosmic pattern of decline? And how does the idea of a distant, inevitable cosmic dissolution change our perception of urgent, immediate environmental concerns? Number 10. Why did Hippolytus of Rome think the world would end in 500 AD? Well, Hippolytus of Rome was an early Christian writer and theologian active in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries AD. He was a very influential figure, though sometimes controversial, and he made some calculations about when the world would end. His prediction for the end of the world was around 500 AD. Hippolytus based his prediction on his interpretation of biblical texts, particularly the Book of Daniel and the Book of Revelation. Like many early Christian thinkers, he believed that human history was divided into periods, and he tried to align these periods with the creation of the world and the coming of Christ. He used a chronological system that dated the creation of the world to around 5,500 BC. Then, following the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Old Testament, he believed that Christ was born in the 5,500th year of creation. He also believed that Christ would return exactly 500 years after his birth, bringing about the end of the world. This would place the end in 500 AD. His calculations were outlined in his commentary on Daniel and in other works. He often linked the 6 days of creation in Genesis to 6 millennia of human history, with the 7th millennium being the Sabbath, a 1,000-year period of rest and peace after Christ's return, what is known as the millennium. Since a day is as 1,000 years in God's eyes, 2 Peter 3:8, the world would last for 6,000 years before the millennium. If creation was around 5,500 BC, then 6,000 years after that would put the end of the world around 500 AD, or shortly after. This idea of a 6,000-year timeline for human history was quite popular among early Christians. Many tried to calculate the age of the world based on genealogies in the Bible. This wasn't unique to Hippolytus, but he was one of the more prominent figures to set a specific date based on these calculations. Of course, 500 AD came and went. The world did not end. The Roman Empire in the West had already fallen in 476 AD, which certainly felt like an end for some, but it wasn't the cosmic cataclysm Hippolytus had envisioned. Life continued. The Eastern Roman Empire Byzantium thrived, and new Germanic kingdoms were established in the West. There were scholars like Dr. Johannes Quasten, who wrote Patrology, a multi-volume work on early Christian literature, discuss Hippolytus's chiliastic millenarian views and his attempts to calculate the end. These attempts were common, driven by a fervent belief in the imminent return of Christ and the desire to understand God's divine plan for history. Hippolytus's failed prediction shows how deeply early Christians sought to understand and anticipate biblical prophecies. It highlights a recurring theme: people using complex calculations based on sacred texts to pinpoint an exact date for the end, only to see it pass. If even highly educated early church fathers got these predictions wrong, what does that say about our certainty in understanding divine timetables? Does the repeated failure of these predictions strengthen or weaken the faith of believers? And why do people keep trying to set dates even after so many have failed? Number 9. What made Montanus declare the end was coming to Papusa? Montanus was a figure who emerged in the second half of the 2nd century AD, around 170 AD, in Phrygia, a region in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. He started a Christian movement that became known as Montanism. This movement was characterized by its intense asceticism, its focus on spiritual gifts like prophecy, and a very strong belief in the imminent end of the world. Montanus himself claimed to be a prophet, and he wasn't alone. 2 prophetesses, Prisca or Priscilla and Maximilla, joined him. They spoke in ecstatic trances, claiming to deliver direct messages from the Holy Spirit. This was a radical departure for many Christians at the time, who were already starting to formalize church structures and authority. The core of their end-of-the-world prediction wasn't just a general sense of doom. Montanus and his followers believed that the New Jerusalem, the heavenly city described in the book of Revelation, was about to descend to earth, and they believed it would descend in a specific location, Papusa, a small town in Phrygia. They saw Papusa as the divinely chosen spot for this final, glorious event. Because of this belief, many of their followers left their homes and jobs and gathered in Papusa, waiting for the celestial city to arrive. They embraced strict fasting, celibacy, and martyrdom, believing that the time was short and that purity was paramount for the coming kingdom. Maximilla, one of the prophetesses, is famously quoted as saying, "After me there will be no more prophecy, but the consummation." This really underlined their belief in the absolute imminence of the end. This movement caused huge turmoil in the early Christian church. Bishops and theologians like Eusebius of Caesarea in his ecclesiastical history documented the rise and eventual condemnation of Montanism. They viewed Montanus and his followers as false prophets who were undermining church authority and spreading dangerous ideas. The emphasis on new prophecy was a challenge to the established apostolic tradition. Of course, the New Jerusalem never descended on Papusa. Maximilla died, and the world continued. The Montanist movement eventually declined, though it persisted in some regions for centuries. Its fervent expectation of the immediate apocalypse, and the specific geographic location for it, stands out as a clear example of a failed end-of-the-world prediction. The Montanist episode shows how a deeply held belief in divine revelation, combined with an intense focus on apocalyptic texts, can lead to very real-world actions, like abandoning everything to wait in a particular place. What makes people so willing to uproot their lives for a prophecy even without clear evidence? How much of the appeal of these movements comes from a desire for belonging and meaning in uncertain times? And when the prophecy fails, what happens to the faith of those who sacrifice everything? Number 8. Why did everyone think the world would end in the year 1000 AD? The year 1000 AD was a huge milestone in medieval Europe, and it brought with it widespread anxieties about the end of the world. This wasn't just a fringe idea, it was a deeply ingrained fear throughout society, from peasants to nobles to religious leaders. The panic stemmed mainly from Christian interpretations of the Bible, particularly the book of Revelation. Chapter 20 of Revelation talks about 1,000 years, during which Satan is bound, followed by his release, and a final battle leading to the last judgment. This passage was often interpreted to mean that Christ would return 1,000 years after his birth, initiating the millennium, a 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, or directly bringing about the end of the world. Given that Jesus was believed to have been born around the turn of the Common Era, the year 1000 AD seemed like the logical, definitive date for these events to unfold. This was reinforced by earlier Christian thinkers, as we saw with Hippolytus, who had set dates for the end around the 6th Zeroth year from creation, often placing it in the first millennium AD. Chroniclers and historians from the time described the atmosphere. Raoul Glaber, a monk and historian writing in the early 11th century, spoke of widespread terror. He described people believing that the second coming of Christ was at hand, and how people devoted themselves to penance, prayers, and acts of charity, hoping to be found worthy. There were stories of portents and signs, comets, unusual weather, famines, and plagues were all interpreted as harbingers of the apocalypse. Their churches were packed. People confessed their sins, sometimes even giving away their possessions. Many expected specific events: fire falling from the sky, earthquakes, the arrival of the Antichrist, or angels trumpeting the last judgment. The popular Latin phrase, mil annis transactus finis mundi, when 1,000 years are past, the end of the world will come, captured the sentiment. Of course, December 31st, 999 AD passed, and January 1st, 1000 AD dawned, and the world was still there. The sun rose. People breathed a collective sigh of relief, often followed by a renewed sense of hope and a period of building and renewal. The fact that the world didn't end actually contributed to a surge of church building and increased optimism in the subsequent centuries, as people felt they had been given a second chance. Scholars like Dr. Richard Landes, a historian who has written extensively on millenarian movements, have studied the year 1000 panic, arguing that while some of the accounts might be exaggerated, the widespread fear and expectation were very real. It was a potent combination of religious belief, cultural anxiety, and a fundamental misunderstanding of biblical prophecy. The Great Year 1000 Scare shows us how powerful a single number, combined with religious belief, can be in shaping an entire continent's mindset. It was a continent-wide moment of mass expectation and mass relief. If a whole society can be gripped by such a fear, what does that say about the human need for grand narratives? Did the failure of this prediction make people question their faith, or did it just shift their focus to new dates? And what are the 1000 ADs of our own time, the dates or events we wrongly assume will bring the end? Number 7. What did Joachim of Fiore predict for 1260 AD? Joachim of Fiore was a Cistercian abbot and mystic from Calabria, Italy, living in the 12th century c. 1135 to 1202. He was a highly influential figure whose writings on history and prophecy profoundly affected medieval thought. He developed a complex system of historical periods which he divided into 3 ages, drawing heavily from biblical interpretation. It would be a monastic ideal extended to all of humanity. He predicted that the age of the sun would transition into the age of the spirit. And he wasn't shy about putting a date on it. He calculated that the age of the spirit would begin around 1260 AD. He arrived at this date through complex calculations based on the book of Revelation, particularly the time, times, and half a time. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, and the 1260 days years mentioned in Revelation. He believed these represented specific historical durations. For Joachim, 1260 AD wasn't the end of the world in a destructive sense, but the end of the current world order and the beginning of a radically new, spiritually advanced one. There was a transformation, a glorious culmination of history, rather than an apocalypse of fire and brimstone. He believed it would be preceded by a period of tribulation, including the rise of the Antichrist, who would be defeated by a new order of spiritual monks. His ideas gained immense popularity, especially among some Franciscan spirituals who saw themselves as the vanguard of this new age of the spirit. They believed their monastic order was a fulfillment of Joachim's prophecies, the new spiritual men who would usher in the millennium. As you can guess, 1260 AD came and went. The age of the spirit did not arrive. There was no radical transformation of society into a monastic utopia. The church continued its institutional existence, and the world remained, for better or worse, much the same as it had been. Joachim's predictions were posthumously condemned by the church, but his ideas continued to influence many millenarian movements throughout history. Dr. Bernard McGinn, a leading scholar of apocalypticism, has written extensively about Joachim of Fiore, detailing his intricate historical schema and his profound influence on later prophetic traditions. Joachim's work shows a sophisticated attempt to understand history as a divine plan unfolding towards a specific, divinely ordained end. The failure of 1260 AD didn't stop people from believing in new spiritual ages or future transformative events. It just meant people looked for different signs or adjusted the date. It highlights the human desire to see meaning and a purposeful direction in history, even when the dates don't line up. Do we still look for ages or epochs in history that promise a radical new beginning? How does the idea of a spiritual transformation of the world compare to secular ideas of progress or revolution? And if these grand historical predictions consistently fail, does it mean history has no ultimate direction or that we just can't see it? Number 6. What was the Aztec fifth sun prophecy, and how did they think it would end? The Aztec civilization, which flourished in Mesoamerica before the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, had a profound and complex cosmology. Central to their worldview was the concept of cosmic cycles, specifically the idea of suns or ages. They believed the universe had gone through 4 previous creations and destructions, and they were living in the era of the fifth sun. According to Aztec mythology, each sun was created and destroyed by a different element or catastrophe. First sun 4, jaguar, ended by jaguars. Second sun 4, wind, ended by hurricanes. Third sun 4, rain, ended by a rain of fire. Fourth sun 4, water, ended by a great flood. The current age, the fifth sun, was known as Nahui Olin, or for movement. The Aztecs believed this age would ultimately be destroyed by massive earthquakes. They saw their role in the cosmos as one of maintaining the balance and postponing this inevitable end. They believed that the sun needed to be nourished with human blood, particularly through ritual sacrifice, to ensure its daily journey across the sky and prevent the fifth sun from ending. This belief system is famously depicted in the Aztec calendar stone Piedra del Sol, a massive basalt disc that is now a prized exhibit in Mexico City's National Anthropology Museum. At the center of the stone is the face of the sun god, Tonatiuh, with his tongue represented by a sacrificial knife, surrounded by glyphs representing the 4 previous suns and the glyph for movement all in itself. This stone was not a calendar in the modern sense, but a cosmogram, a map of their universe and its cycles. The Aztecs did not predict a specific date in our calendar for the end of the fifth sun. It was an eventual fated outcome. However, the constant ritual sacrifices and the very structure of their society were predicated on the urgent need to appease the gods and stave off this destined destruction. They lived with the understanding that their current world was fragile and could end at any moment if they failed in their cosmic duties. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, led by Hernán Cortés, it threw the Aztec world into chaos. Many Aztecs, particularly Montezuma II, the emperor, initially interpreted the arrival of the Spanish and their leader as possible omens, or even the return of the god Quetzalcoatl, signaling profound changes or the impending end of an era. The conquest itself, with its violence, disease, and the destruction of their temples and way of life, felt like the end of their world, even if it wasn't the apocalyptic earthquake they had predicted. Scholars like Dr. David Carrasco, a professor of the history of religions at Harvard University, have explored the intricate relationship between Aztec cosmology, ritual, and their perception of time and destruction. He highlights how the cyclical nature of their belief system allowed for both terror at impending destruction and the hope of renewal. The Aztec fifth sun prophecy didn't fail in the sense of a calendar date. It was a core belief about the fated end of their era, an end that in a way did come through conquest and cultural destruction, even if not by a literal earthquake. It shows how deeply a culture can integrate cosmological fears into its daily life and political structure. How does the idea of constantly feeding the sun to prevent its end influence daily life and morality? Does a cyclical view of destruction and creation make historical events feel less significant or more fated? And in what ways do we, in our modern world, still try to feed the sun to prevent our own perceived ends? Number 5. How did people interpret Comet Halley as a sign of the end? Comets have scared people for a very long time. They appear suddenly in the night sky, often with a bright head and a long tail, unlike anything else. Before we understood them scientifically, they were seen as omens, harbingers of disaster, death, plague, or the end of the world. Comet Halley, being one of the brightest and most regular periodic comets, has a particularly long history of being linked to apocalyptic fears. Halley's comet appears roughly every 75 to 76 years. Its appearances have been recorded for millennia. One of the most famous ancient sightings was in 1066 AD, just before the Norman conquest of England. It was widely seen as an omen of great change, if not the direct end of the world. The Bayeux Tapestry, a famous embroidered cloth depicting the events of 1066, shows the comet and features people pointing at it in fear and wonder, with the inscription, Isti mirant stella, they marvel at the star. For the Anglo-Saxons, it was seen as a bad sign, a prediction of the defeat and death of King Harold Godwinson. For William the Conqueror's Normans, it became a sign of divine favor for their invasion. So here it wasn't the end of the world, but the end of a kingdom and a way of life. Earlier, in 837 AD, during another appearance of Halley's comet, Emperor Louis Up, son of Charlemagne, was reportedly so terrified by it that he sought advice from his court astrologers and took measures of penance, believing it signaled a divine warning or impending doom for his empire. While it wasn't a specific end-of-the-world date that failed, it highlights the intense fear and apocalyptic interpretations associated with comets in ancient and medieval times. The general belief was that comets were not natural celestial bodies, but divine messages. They broke the predictable order of the heavens, suggesting that the natural order, and perhaps the world itself, was about to be disrupted. Texts from ancient China, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome all show evidence of comets being seen as ominous. Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher we talked about earlier, wrote about comets, noting that a single comet causes more anxiety than all the stars put together. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Halley's comet reappeared, these ancient fears blended with new scientific anxieties. In 1910, astronomers discovered that the Earth would pass through the comet's tail. Initial scientific reports suggested that the tail contained poisonous gases, specifically cyanogen. This led to widespread panic. Some people believed the gases would suffocate all life on Earth. Entrepreneurs sold anti-comet pills and gas masks. Again, it wasn't a specific ancient prophecy, but the ancient fear of comets was updated for a new age, and it triggered a global scare based on a misunderstanding of scientific information. Of course, the Earth passed through Halley's comet's tail in 1910, and nothing happened. The gases in the tail were so diffuse that they posed no threat. The world continued. The recurring fears around Halley's Comet show how an ancient omen can evolve, linking natural phenomena to apocalyptic outcomes across millennia. Do we still rely on natural events as omens, even if we dress them up with scientific-sounding explanations? How does our understanding of the universe change how we react to things we can't control? And what does it mean when ancient fears resurface with modern anxieties, even after scientific explanations? Number 4. Did the Sibylline oracles predict Rome's final downfall? The Sibylline oracles were a collection of prophecies, written in Greek hexameter verse, attributed to various Sibyls, who were ancient prophetesses of the classical world. These oracles were consulted by the Romans during times of crisis. The original collection, famously bought by Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome, was burned in 83 BCE, but new collections of oracles, often written by Jewish or Christian authors, emerged and were circulated for centuries. These later Sibylline oracles were much more focused on apocalyptic themes, including the destruction of cities, empires, and the world itself. These particular oracles, often referred to as the pseudo-Sibylline oracles by scholars to distinguish them from the older, genuinely pagan ones, began to incorporate Old Testament and New Testament themes. They predicted the downfall of powerful empires, the coming of a messianic figure, a final judgment, and the end of the current age. Rome, as the dominant power, naturally featured prominently. For example, Sibylline Oracle Book the Third and Book the Eighth contain detailed predictions about Rome's eventual destruction, often by fire, and its final collapse. These prophecies were not specific calendar dates, but rather a fated end, a final reckoning for Rome's perceived sins and tyranny. They spoke of Rome being brought low, its splendor extinguished, and its power broken. Texts written between the 2nd century BCE and the 5th century CE reflected the anxieties and hopes of various groups, particularly those who were oppressed by Roman rule or who saw the empire as a force of evil. Your Christian authors in particular used these oracles to predict Rome's demise, seeing it as the fourth beast of Daniel or the War of Babylon from Revelation. They expected a cosmic judgment that would bring down the pagan empire and usher in a new Christian era. Of course, the Western Roman Empire did fall in 476 AD, when the last Western Roman Emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. This event certainly felt like an end for many people in the West, but it wasn't the total fiery cosmic destruction predicted in the oracles. The Eastern Roman Empire Byzantium continued for another 1,000 years, and Roman culture, law, and language continued to influence Europe profoundly. The end was more of a long, drawn-out transformation than a single, sudden apocalypse. Scholars like Dr. J.J. Collins, a professor of Old Testament and New Testament at Yale University, have studied the Sibylline oracles, highlighting their complex authorship and their importance as a window into ancient apocalyptic thought. He points out that they served as both propaganda and comfort, giving voice to hopes and fears about the future of empires and the world. So, while Rome did eventually decline and fall, it wasn't in the specific manner or by the specific divine intervention prophesied in the Sibylline oracles. The world didn't end, it just changed, as it always does. Do we still look for external prophecies to explain the decline of powerful nations or systems? How much of our hope for justice is tied to the downfall of those we perceive as unjust? And if powerful empires always seem to fall eventually, what does that say about the ultimate sustainability of any human creation? Number 3, did ancient Chinese prophecies point to the world's end? Ancient Chinese culture, with its deep history and sophisticated philosophical and religious systems, also harbored ideas about cosmic cycles and potential endings. While not always as overtly end of the world as some Western prophecies, there were certainly beliefs in texts that hinted at great cataclysms, dissolutions, and the end of cosmic or dynastic ages. Chinese cosmology was often based on the concept of the mandate of heaven, Tianming. This idea stated that the emperor's right to rule was granted by heaven, but only as long as he governed justly and wisely. If an emperor or a dynasty became corrupt, oppressive, or incompetent, heaven would withdraw its mandate, leading to natural disasters, rebellions, and the eventual overthrow of the dynasty. These events, while not the end of the world, certainly felt like the end of their world order. Floods, droughts, earthquakes, and comets were all seen as signs that the mandate was failing, and a cosmic shift was imminent. Beyond dynastic cycles, some philosophical and religious traditions, particularly Taoism and certain Buddhist adaptations, also spoke of vast cosmic periods of creation and destruction. For instance, the Buddhist concept of kalpas, which we'll touch on later, also made its way to China and influenced thought about the universe's ultimate dissolution. Specific texts like the Tuibe Tu chart of pushing back, a collection of prophecies from the Tang Dynasty's 7th-10th century CE, have been interpreted by some as predicting various historical events, including the end of different eras. While often vague and open to multiple interpretations, they fueled beliefs in a predetermined historical trajectory that would include significant world-altering changes. One specific prophecy that gained traction during various periods of unrest, particularly in the later imperial dynasties, concerned the coming of the Maitreya Buddha. This future Buddha is believed to appear on Earth to teach the Dharma when the teachings of the historical Buddha have been forgotten. The coming of Maitreya was often associated with a golden age, but also sometimes with preceding periods of great suffering, chaos, and cosmic upheaval, a kind of transformative end of the current corrupt age. Peasant rebellions, like the White Lotus Rebellion and the Yuan and Qing dynasties, often used Maitreya prophecies to justify their uprisings, believing they were ushering in a new era or the imminent end of the old one. These were not specific calendar dates that failed, but rather overarching cosmological and eschatological frameworks that provided a narrative for periods of profound change, and often for the end of a societal structure. The end was a transformation, a clearing the way of the old to make way for the new, rather than a final absolute destruction of the planet. And historians like Dr. Timothy Brooke, a scholar of Chinese history at the University of British Columbia, have examined the role of prophecy and apocalyptic thought in Chinese history, showing how it intertwined with political legitimacy, popular uprisings, and religious movements. The idea that cosmic order is directly tied to human morality and governance is a powerful one. Does this ancient Chinese perspective offer a useful lens through which to view modern political instability and environmental crises? What if our collected behavior directly impacts the mandate of our civilizations? And how does the cyclical view of history, so prominent in Chinese thought, compare to the Western linear view of history towards a definitive end? Number 2, did early Buddhist texts describe the universe dissolving? Yes, absolutely. Buddhist cosmology, from its earliest texts, has always included a profound and intricate understanding of cosmic cycles, which include vast periods of creation, sustenance, and eventual dissolution of the universe. This isn't a single end-of-the-world event in a human timeframe, but an enormous, recurring cosmic process. The dissolution phase, Samvartakalpa, is described in detail in various early Buddhist texts, such as the Diha Nikaya in the Pali Canon and Abhidharma literature. It explains that the universe can dissolve in 3 ways: by fire, by water, or by wind. Dissolution by fire. This is the most common and dramatic. After many kalpas, 7 suns appear in the sky, scorching the earth and all realms of existence below certain heavenly realms like the Brahma worlds. Everything, including mountains and oceans, dries up and burns away into cosmic ash. Dissolution by water after even longer periods. A great flood occurs, washing away everything up to higher heavenly realms. By dissolution by wind, this is the most extensive, occurring after the longest periods, where mighty winds blow away all existence, even higher up into the formless realms. Crucially, these dissolutions are not the final end of everything. Sentient beings with consciousness, simply migrate to higher, less material realms during the destruction and return when the new universe forms. The cycle repeats endlessly. It's a fundamental part of the Buddhist understanding of impermanence, anicca, on a cosmic scale. Nothing, not even a universe, is permanent. The purpose of these descriptions wasn't to predict a specific doomsday date, but to illustrate the impermanence of all conditioned existence and to encourage spiritual practice. If even universes are subject to creation and destruction, then attachment to anything in this world is ultimately futile. It serves as a powerful metaphor for the illusory and transient nature of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Scholars like Dr. G.P. Malalasika, a renowned Ceylonese Sri Lankan scholar of Pali and Buddhist literature, have meticulously cataloged and explained these cosmological concepts. And he highlights that these are not prophecies in the predictive sense, but rather a philosophical framework for understanding the nature of reality and urging practitioners towards enlightenment. So, the Buddhist concept of universal dissolution isn't a failed prediction. It's an inherent part of their cosmology, a process that is always happening or about to happen on an unimaginable timescale. It's a deep truth about impermanence, not a date on a calendar. Does the vastness of cosmic time in Buddhist thought make human concerns seem trivial or more urgent? Versus constantly dissolving and reforming, how does that change our understanding of our own existence within it? And could the scientific concept of the universe's ultimate heat death or big crunch be seen as a modern echo of these ancient cosmic dissolutions? Number 1. What did Jewish messianic expectations predict for the world's end? Jewish tradition, especially within its rich messianic expectations, also holds ideas about the end of days. Akarita Yamim. This isn't usually a prediction of the world's physical destruction, but rather a profound transformation of the world into a perfect messianic age. However, these transformations are often envisioned as being preceded by periods of intense suffering, cosmic upheavals, and the breakdown of the existing world order. The concept of the Messiah Mashiach is central. The Messiah is believed to be a descendant of King David who will usher in a golden age. This age will see the ingathering of all exiles to the land of Israel, the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, universal peace, the end of all suffering and injustice, and a time when all humanity will recognize and worship the one God. This is an end in the sense that the current imperfect world will cease to be replaced by a perfected one. Biblical texts like Isaiah, Daniel, and Zechariah speak of a future time of peace and justice, but also of wars, natural disasters, and the rise of evil figures like Gog and Magog that will precede it. These events are often interpreted as the birth pangs of the Messiah. Throughout Jewish history, especially during periods of persecution or great upheaval, there have been various attempts to predict the arrival of the Messiah and thus the beginning of the end of days. Bar Kokhba, 2nd century CE, Rabbi Akiva, a revered sage, declared Simon Bar Kokhba, the leader of a major Jewish revolt against Rome 132 to 135 CE, to be the Messiah. This was a direct prediction that his arrival would usher in the Messianic era. The revolt's brutal defeat, Bar Kokhba's death, and the subsequent Roman persecution made this a tragically failed prediction of the Messiah's advent and the end of days. Sabbatai Zevi, 17th century CE, this was one of the most significant and dramatic messianic movements. Sabbatai Zevi, a Kabbalist from Smyrna, modern Turkey, declared himself the Messiah in 1665. His movement swept across the Jewish world, with hundreds of thousands of followers in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East believing the end of days was at hand. They sold possessions, prepared to return to Israel, and anticipated his coming as ruler of the world. He even set specific dates for the redemption. However, in 1666, under threat of death by the Ottoman Sultan, Sabbatai Zevi converted to Islam. This was a catastrophic blow to his followers, a complete failure of the messianic prediction that caused immense spiritual and social upheaval. These were clear historical instances where people believed the Messiah was here or about to arrive, and that the world was on the cusp of its final, transformative age. The world, of course, continued. The Bar Kokhba revolt was crushed, and Sabbatai Zevi became a Muslim. The Messianic age, as predicted by these movements, did not materialize. Scholars like Gershom Scholem, a leading authority on Jewish mysticism, documented the Sabbatian movement in great detail, showing how profoundly deeply held Messianic expectations could lead to fervent belief and immense disappointment. He also explored the nuances of catastrophic versus normative messianism in Jewish thought. The repeated failure of these predictions didn't extinguish the hope for the Messiah, but it did make Jewish scholars and rabbis much warier of setting specific dates or identifying specific individuals as the Messiah. The focus shifted back to ethical living, observance of mitzvot commandments, and a general faith in God's timing. What does it mean for people to hold on to a messianic hope for thousands of years, even after countless failed predictions? How does the failure of a collective belief impact the identity and future direction of a community? And if the end of days is not a destruction, but a perfection of the world, what does that say about our human capacity to imagine a truly better future?